Ready on this Friday evening. I told some over supper just a little while ago that this is a highlight for me each year, this weekend. I do not get to stay as long as I would like to almost every year, but it is truly a highlight and it is an honor for me to stand before you this hour. Let's talk for the next few minutes about love, not lust, in marriage. Of course, this falls under our heading for the weekend of different, not less. The purpose, I believe, and I haven't talked with Michael or anyone in particular who assigned this topic, but I've understood it, or I've assumed at least in my mind, that the purpose or the thinking behind this title is for us to point out and to illustrate that our perspective on romance and on marriage and on love relationships between a man and a woman, that our perspective is very, very different from that is commonly found in our modern world. Different, yes, certainly not less. And in fact, I would attest and I would strongly point out that the biblical viewpoint, the Christian viewpoint toward marriage and romantic love and marital love, that it is vastly, infinitely superior to that of the world. Let's begin in the book of Proverbs. We'll visit the book of Proverbs a few times throughout the course of this study. Let's begin in the final chapter, Proverbs 31. As I introduce this study further, let me tell you that one reason that the Christian view of marriage is different, yea, superior to that of the world, is because truly Christian marriage is not rooted solely in the outward, in the physical. You do not need me to stand up here and to tell you tonight that we live in a highly sexualized society. If I mention that, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. In fact, I have said through the years that sex is used to sell virtually everything. There for a while, you could drive through downtown Birmingham on the interstates back close to where I live, and there would be billboards with these scantily clad women, and they were selling parts from a junkyard. There's a massive junkyard there in the Birmingham metro, and they want people to come and buy spare parts for their vehicles, and they use sex to sell junkyard parts. Okay? So there's an emphasis. There's an emphasis in this modern world on sex and sexuality, and with that emphasis, therefore, there comes an emphasis on the outward, the physical. But look with me in Proverbs 31 and verse 30, and notice what the wise man said near the close of this grand book, the book of Proverbs. He said, "Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised." She shall be praised. Now, I married a beautiful woman. I have always believed Beth is just absolutely beautiful, and I'm thankful that I married a beautiful woman. But if you could get to know Beth the way I know Beth, then you'll realize that what really makes her pretty is not her crystal blue eyes. Now, they help, but that's not really what makes her pretty. It doesn't matter what we look like when we marry. I'll make you a promise. If you and your spouse can live the next 50 years together, I will promise you, you will not look the same, and neither will she. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. A fundamental difference between us in the church, our view of romance and marriage, is that it is not rooted solely in the outward, the fleshly, the physical. Now, tonight let's deal with 2 or 3 basic points as time permits. First of all, point number 1, I want to share with you, as I began thinking about my actual title, my title was, or is, Love, Not Lust in Marriage. As I began thinking about that, it bothered me a little bit. I was a little bit uncomfortable with that title for this reason. I don't want you to think, in fact, I don't want anyone to think, that there is not to be sexual desire and passion in Christian marriage. In fact, I fear that for far too long in too many places, I fear that has been the misunderstanding. And that's just not biblical. If we want to say that we are men and women of the book, we need to stand on the book regarding this matter as much as we do on any other biblical topic. And so point number one tonight, if I may, I want to begin by talking to you about lawful sexual desire. There is such a thing as lawful, meaning it is within the parameters of God's divine law, lawful sexual desire. Now, stay in the book of Proverbs with me and turn back to chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5. Be finding verse 15. In Proverbs 5 and verse 15, notice here what the wise man penned by inspiration. He said, "Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well." Now what he's talking about here, if you haven't already picked up on it, he's going to be talking about the sexual relationship in marriage. And throughout the book of Proverbs, so often Solomon or other wise men, they take on the place of mentors. And they're counseling, as it were, perhaps their own sons, or they're counseling pupils in the way of sacred wisdom, spiritual wisdom. And so here Solomon, as it were, is addressing his own son, and he's counseling his son, telling him, "Son, when it comes to your sexual fulfillment," he says, "you need to have your own well. You need to have that which belongs to you and you alone. You drink waters out of thine own cistern, running waters out of thine own well." Otherwise, here's the alternative in verse 16. "For men who turn to any and every woman whom they meet or encounter," this probably should be rendered in the form of a question mark, which I think the Old American Standard Version does, 1901, verse 17 or 16. "Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad and rivers of waters in the streets." In other words, in the form of a question, if you're not drinking water out of your own well, if you're not drinking water out of your own cistern, you're drinking water out of the gutter. That's the point there in verse 16. And it's in the form of a question, a rhetorical question, meaning you wouldn't want to do that, would you? See, what do we call rivers of waters in the streets? What do we call those? Gutters. Don't miss the point here. You're either drinking water from your own well or you're resorting to the gutters of the streets. He says, no, verse 17. He reverts back to the thought of verse 15. "No, let them be only thine own and not strangers with thee." Now, we could stop at verse 17 and we would have the clear biblical teaching of monogamy, right? And so many people who claim to be Bible-believing people, that's what they want to stress. They want to stress that God-ordained marriage is one man and one woman. But seemingly some of those very people, they acknowledge God's monogamous intent in marriage, but then when it comes to sex, it's almost as if sex is just a necessary evil in marriage. Let me tell you something. God created sex, and God did not create anything evil. Okay? So let's not stop at verse 17. Let's read the rest of this and get the divine picture in its fullness. Verse 18. "Let thy fountain," now he's already referred very poetically to the wife as a fountain. "Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe." This is graphic imagery that was common to Near Eastern poetry in this age. Often some of these animals, they were used because of their gracefulness. They were used as figures of beauty and so forth. "Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe." Now get this. This is in your Bible. "Let her breast satisfy thee at all times. And be thou ravished," a Hebrew word related to the word for intoxicated. "Let her be thou ravished," or intoxicated as it were, "always with her love." So point number one tonight, I want you to know that there is such a thing as lawful sexual desire. And I would probably build this case, first of all, by pointing out in the book of Genesis 1:27, so God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. God's the one who created gender. God's the one who created sex. And I'll say it again tonight. God does not create anything evil. Folks, we do no favors to ourselves. We do no favors to our own homes and marriages. And let me tell you this, we do no favors to a lost world round about us if we ride the pendulum clear from one extreme that glorifies and deifies sex into something that it was never intended to be, and we ride that pendulum all the way to the other extreme, and we think that marriage is basically platonic and that sex is just a necessary evil, and once you've had your 2 or 3 kids, then you just forget about it. No, that's not Bible. And as you know and I know about extremes, where's the truth so often found? Truth is found in the middle. The Hebrews author said in Hebrews 13 and verse 4, marriage is honorable in all and the bed undefiled. In God's eyes, God looks down at the marriage bed. God looks down at the relationship, yea, the sexual relationship I'm talking about, between a rightful husband and his rightful wife, and God is pleased. Marriage is honorable. The bed undefiled. But whoremongers, fornicators, and adulterers stand under the condemnation of God. God will judge. Hebrews 13 and verse 4. So, number one, let's acknowledge and let's be sure to acknowledge lawful sexual desire. But now point number two, very quickly, I thought about this, and in thinking on this lesson for tonight, I wanted to share with you and I wanted to stimulate your thinking by way of asking this question. If we were tasked with reducing the answer to one word, just one word answer, when asked the question, well, Cliff, what is the difference? What is the difference between sex between a man and a woman outside of marriage and sex between a rightful husband, his rightful wife, within the bounds of marriage? In a one-word answer, what's the difference? How would you answer that in your minds? Think about it. It's rather simple. There is a one word. You say, well, it's sin. Well, that's true. But what's the essential principle behind sin every time? The essential principle behind sin is always selfishness. And I want us to understand tonight, and this is where the church differs vastly from the world. Sex outside of marriage, even heterosexual sex between men and women, if it's outside of marriage, it is rooted in selfishness. Within the bounds of matrimony, within this holy institution that only God could come up with. I mean, there are certain things in life that are so grand that you just have to immediately acknowledge, God, only you could do this. God, only you could design the church in your wisdom. Ephesians 3, 10 and 11. God, only you could design marriage in your wisdom. Ephesians 5, 22 through 33. Marriage is one such thing. And the difference is between sex outside of that relationship and sex within that relationship, the difference is selfishness. Selfishness. Why does a man seek to go to bed with that woman to whom he is not married? Selfishness. Selfishness. Now, in marriage it's different. But to illustrate this, let me show you. Let's open now to the New Testament. Go with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Our third point is going to deal with agape love. Okay, love. Linsky called it the love of intelligence and the love of purpose. And I think there's a lot of depth to that kind of description. That's our third point. But until we get to that and we talk about agape love, the foundation of Christian marriage, the foundation of sex within Christian marriage, I want us to look to the purpose of our human bodies. Look with me here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13. What Paul is doing is he is either anticipating an argument that he expects some detractors in Corinth to make in response maybe to this epistle, or he already knows this argument is being made. He says, meats for the belly and the belly for meats. You say, well, Cliff, that's not much of an argument. That doesn't even make sense to me. Oh, it's a pretty powerful argument. It's a pretty good argument if you understand what he's saying. It's basically the argument from nature. Meats for the belly. In other words, a person would look at the design of the human frame, the human body, and would understand that the belly, the stomach, the abdomen is made for food. We eat and we ingest food and it goes down into our bellies, and there it is digested and processed and assimilated, as it were, into our bloodstream and into our bodies for nourishment. Meats for the belly and the belly for meats. In other words, their argument could be rephrased as, hey, this is just natural. Sex between a man and a woman, it's just as natural as eating food. Now see, when you understand that at surface, at first blush, you think, well, that's a pretty strong argument. No, not really. So Paul says, but, verse 13 still, but God shall destroy both it and them. Whoa, Paul, why are you talking so strongly? He explains, now the body is not for fornication. Our human bodies, the outward aspect of our existences, that these are not, God did not give us our bodies just to have playgrounds. Okay, and I speak rather crudely there, and please bear with me. But this body is not given to us just for our own selfish gratification and pleasure. The body is not for fornication. Well, Paul, what's it for? The body is for the Lord. Oh, now that changes everything. And see, Christians in marriage, they take this mentality, or at least we ought to have this mentality, and we bring it with us into our homes and into our marriages. My body is for the service of the Lord. My body is for the glorification of the Lord. Now I'm building up to saying something that years ago, before I spoke on a marriage retreat, I really wrestled with this. I said, I don't know if I can get up in front of people and I can say that. I'm building up to it. But for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Now, move down. There's much information, and I trust you're familiar with it in the continuation of chapter 6. But move down with me to verse 20, the final verse of this chapter. For ye are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Again, now the body's not for fornication. My taking my body and selfishly indulging it, selfishly involving it in things that are gratifying to me personally, that's not God's intention for my body. But my body is intended to glorify the Lord. Now let me ask you this. How is God glorified by our bodies and by our lives? How? You basically have two choices. God is either glorified by our using our bodies in things that He has not authorized, and we know that's false, or God is glorified when we employ our bodies in the activities that God authorizes and commands. And here's the statement that was so hard for me a few years ago to get up and ever say. But when a rightful husband and a rightful wife in the bounds of matrimony lovingly give themselves to each other in the sexual relationship, God is glorified. Because God designed the human body for that relationship, not for selfishness. See, outside of marriage, it's all about me, it's all about the present, it's all about temporary pleasures. But in marriage, in marriage, it's about God's plan. And it's about God's gift. I meant to include this on point 1 and I skipped over it. We need to understand, and we need more preaching and teaching, I believe, to the effect that sexuality, the sexual relationship, is God's wedding gift to every rightful married couple. That's God's wedding gift. And I've jokingly said before, I said, wow, other people just gave me a toaster. You know? They just gave me a toaster or gave me a blender. God gives the best gifts. He does. Nothing wrong with sex. This is God's wedding gift. But I want you to see the difference. It's not rooted in selfishness. It's rooted in giving yourselves to each other because you both have already given yourselves to God. This is God's plan. True love, not merely lust in marriage. Now, in the closing minutes, number 3, let's talk about agape love. The love of intelligence, the love of purpose. Where better could we go than 1 Corinthians chapter 13? Turn over there with me. I know you know it. Some of you in this audience tonight could quote most, if not all, of 1 Corinthians 13. I think that's wonderful. I wish, once again, that we as a body of people, I wish we were more Bible-toting, Bible-quoting, like our grandparents and our great-grandparents were known for being. But even if you can quote 1 Corinthians 13, I would invite you to turn over there with me, and I want you to notice something with me here. It's amazing to me that we'll go to 1 Corinthians 13 and we'll preach and teach about love and we'll apply it in the congregation, and rightfully so. I mean, you get 50 or 100 or 500 people together in the body of Christ in a local congregation, and you'd better be teaching about love because we're people. We're all people, and sometimes we're all unlovable. And yet all of us always need loving. And as one woman told me years ago, she says people need loving the most when they deserve it the least. That's true. So we better be preaching and teaching 1 Corinthians 13 in the context of the local congregation. But friends, we have absolutely got to be applying it in our homes. In our homes. 1 Corinthians 13, begin with me at verse 4. Charity, love, agape love. The love of intelligence, which means that this is not mere sentiment. When Linsky described it as the love of intelligence, there's understanding about agape. It's intellectual. There's understanding behind it. I'm choosing to love you because I understand gospel truths. In that way, it's also a love of purpose. It's intentional. I'm intending to love you. You're acting awfully unlovable, but I'm intending to love you anyway. And how grateful are we men that sometimes we as husbands, we are unlovable, but our wives intend to love us anyway. And thank God for that. This charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. Those latter two pertain to pride. True agape love is antithetical. It's opposite to pride. It doth not behave itself unseemly. It seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. Now true love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. It's been said of agape love that it seeks the highest good of its object. And it does that. It does that even to the point or at the cost of sacrifice. Because I love my wife, I put my wife before me. I put her needs, emotional needs, physical needs, sexual needs. I put her needs before mine. Now the beauty of it and the wisdom of God in this relationship is she's striving to do the same thing for me. You tell me, how does that fail? If we have God-fearing men who love their wives with intelligence and with purpose, they love their wives sacrificially, they put her good before their own, and then we have godly Christian women who love their husbands likewise, you tell me how the devil gets a toehold in that marriage. It's going to be difficult. I told Glenn just before getting up tonight that I was going to try to quote him, and I'd probably butcher it, and I probably will, but Glenn may not even remember this. Years ago, I had opened up the Gospel Journal, and I was reading an article that Brother Glenn had written in the Gospel Journal, and it was on the marriage relationship. And I can't quote it verbatim, but this quote, the gist of it, has stuck in my mind now for years. Words to this effect. Before marriage, the devil seemingly does everything he can do to get a man and a woman in bed together. But after the marriage vows have been taken, the same devil now seemingly does everything he can do to keep that man and woman apart sexually. What I want you to understand tonight, and what I'm going to close with and leave with you, we've noticed lawful sexual desire. We've noticed the damning quality of selfishness. That's what changes. That's what's different outside of marriage from what's in marriage. And we've noticed a little bit about agape love. The love that puts the other person first. And what I want to show you is that in God's plan for marriage, it's not about the lust. Oh, there's passion. I'm convinced the world out here doing all their wicked stuff with their own devices, they don't know true passion. They don't. True passion burns brightest within godly marriage. I believe that with all my heart. But in godly Christian marriage, it's about so much more than just the passion. It's about love for God, number one, and love for each other, number two. And in homes like that, the devil has his work cut out for him. Thank you.